folklore programs in academe. And I'm going to briefly introduce our conversationalists here and very quickly say something about the program that they come from, and they can correct me if I get this wrong. But from George Mason University, we have Peggy Yocom from the English department, and George Mason University has a College of Liberal Arts and Science Folklore and Mythology minor, and the Department of English has a Folklore, Mythology, and Literature concentration, and the College of Liberal Arts and Human Sciences gives a Master of Arts in Interdisciplinary Studies, which also has a folklore concentration. From the University of Oregon, immediately to my left, is Sharon Sherman, from also the Department of English, and Oregon gives a certificate in folklore at the BA level, an MA degree in folklore, and a PhD in English with a structured emphasis in folklore, and there's also a certificate in folklore at the undergraduate level. Jason Jackson, in the middle here, is from Indiana University, the Department of Folklore and Ethnomusicology, and as you probably know, Indiana gives BA, MA, and PhD in folklore, and they have separate dual MAs with a couple of separate schools at IU, journalism and library sciences. Dory Noyes is from Ohio State University in the Department of English and director of the Center for Folklore Studies, and they have an undergraduate folklore minor through comparative studies. In the Department of English, folklore may be done as an informal concentration at all degree levels. In the Department of Comparative Studies, folklore is one of several specializations offered at all degree levels, but it does not appear on the degree. And recently, I believe, the Graduate of Interdisciplinary Specialization now offers an interdisciplinary minor. Is that?
It's now under review, but we've been assured it will happen. So
Okay.
an interdisciplinary graduate minor, which will put folklore on the transcript.
And then there is also the Center for Folklore Studies at Ohio State University. Pat Turner from University of California, Davis is Vice Provost of Undergraduate Studies. She's a professor of American Studies. There's no formal folklore program at UC Davis, but between Pat and Jay Meckling and some others, folklore has been offered largely through the American Studies Department. And I'm Elliott Oring. I was professor of anthropology at California State University, Los Angeles. There was no folklore program, no folklore minor. I taught courses in folklore within the Department of Anthropology and in American Studies when there was an American Studies program. So actually we have people coming from different kinds of programs with different degrees of establishment in terms of formal and informal folklore. And when this panel was proposed, this conversation was proposed, I was asked to suggest some questions for the panelists, and we'll go through them, but I want to let the audience know ahead of time what these general questions were. There are only really 4 here, but I think our conversation will range beyond this 4. But the first was, what are the opportunities and pitfalls for folklore studies in the contemporary university? The second, in everyday language, how can we best describe to the department chair, dean, provost, trustee our field's unique and essential contribution to the modern university, the humanities and social sciences undergraduate education? In other words, what is the case we make for folklore at these different levels in the university? 3, what could the AFS do to improve the situation of folklore studies at the university? And 4th, a more conceptual question, what would be the impact on folklore studies if the PhD program in folklore disappeared entirely? So these were the kinds of questions that I wanted the panel to think about or think with, and I think the conversation will be much more wide-ranging than that. But just to get it off and to keep us focused, let's talk about what are the opportunities and pitfalls for folklore studies at the university. Somebody can jump in.
I'll jump in. I'll jump in. There's always pitfalls, and we all know what they are, pretty much. And I would say you can look at it both ways, as having an opportunity and having a pitfall. What we've done is we have a folklore program, and it consists of people from across campus. Many of these people, however, do have PhDs in folklore. Most of them are in the English department, but not all of them. We have people in anthropology, people in arts and administration. And on the one hand, that's great because it's interdisciplinary. It's wonderful for the students, but we don't have that proximity. So the people in English have the proximity. So we can run across the hall and compare ideas, keep the conversation going more than some of the folks who are out in different satellite areas of the campus. But it is also an opportunity for students because they get a very broad education. The biggest pitfall, I think, is deciding whether to move out and on and up or stay. And so this PhD in English, I can't tell you how many people have gotten it, but it's been very, very small in number. And partly that's because the English department doesn't always admit the people that want to come in to get this degree with a structured emphasis in folklore. And so I have thought for many years about leaving the English department. I mean, many years. Many. But when I arrived at Oregon, Barry Tolkien was there. He and I worked together for 10 years. And Barry said, remember, if you leave the English department and you become a folklore program out on your own, they can cut you. But they'll never cut the English department. So it's a difficult situation.
Okay, Dory, you're kind of in a similar position in respect to Oregon because you have all these people in other faculties and not a real degree program in the sense of Indiana. What's your take on it?
I would concur with everything Sherry has said. I'm agnostic, really, about our own strategy, about whether the best thing is an interdepartmental PhD program or an autonomous department, because the situation of having powerful friends in a lot of places happens to be working quite well for us at the moment. On the other hand, it depends on the sort of charisma and energy. Eternal vigilance is the price of belonging. You have to be constantly keeping this network animated for the thing not to sort of fade away as certain people retire, for example. A department, on the other hand, does not necessarily have the institutional permanence. Nothing is permanent in today's university. So I generally concur. I wanted to talk about a couple of issues in the academic climate that are simultaneously issues and pitfalls for us. Those are interdisciplinarity and outreach. Interdisciplinarity, which obviously we were we were pre-disciplinary. We were everything back in the days of philology, and so we have a kind of ancestry that allows us to talk to anybody, and we have right now the necessity of survival that has taught us how to adapt to our local milieu. And that actually is capital that we can use not only in creating networks for ourselves, but this also gives us a kind of power that allows us to do normative disciplinary colleagues favors. They are not used to looking outside. They are not used to talking to somebody else. We have very often been in a position to lead colleagues starting out on interdisciplinary ventures to parts of the university they didn't know about, to international people they didn't know about, etc. So people owe us favors, and that's quite useful. One example, the Human Subjects Review. Barbara Lloyd, our co-director, gives consultation to anybody who wants it, not just folklorists, anybody. The whole College of Humanities on how you fill out one of these applications. We've been making noise about that. I'm now on a university committee to reform the thing, which is not likely to get anywhere, but is at least doing a public service, not just for us, but for other people. So use the skill we have to make yourselves useful to other people without wanting to sort of co-opt what they do. In the same way, I think the growth of the field is very much not just in majors, but in minors. It's in making it easy for people at PhD level, undergraduate level, whatever, to have a little concentrated, pithy précis of the field, and that again sort of builds up the support network. Pitfalls of interdisciplinarity, the interdisciplinarity tax. You can kill yourself with too much kindness, as every senior person as every senior folklorist at Ohio State has found out, and as I am presently learning. You can diffuse yourself into these sort of local commitments and have nothing at your core. It's very hard to make the time for the folklorists, as Sherry says, to talk to one another, to develop a common discourse. You've got to look after your core, because the way that you can't say we're interdisciplinary because everybody is now. The way that we have to package ourselves is as a networked discipline. So outreach is pretty much the same trade-off. There's a lot of interest in it, as has been said earlier. Outreach, poses the kinds of obvious advantages. It pleases administrators, but we have to remember that outreach is now a competitive thing, because when administrations hear outreach, what they are thinking about is fundraising. The constituencies among whom you do outreach are the ones who are going to respond later with, loyalty. So every department is competing for this. Ethnic studies in particular has first dibs on it, and you are not going to get anywhere by competing with ethnic studies, nor should you, I think. So there's that. There's the fact that if you position yourself as being evaluated on the quality of outreach you do, you are more vulnerable than if you seek to be evaluated by your primary academic commitments, because outreach stuff is risky. It depends on funding. It depends on people having the energy to do it apart from their day job teaching students. A lot can go wrong in outreach. And finally, something about life cycle. It's not just the individual faculty member that should wait until they are a bit older, but programs, I think, you can move from an academic focus out into the applied world because everybody's doing that. You can't go in the other direction. You cannot pitch yourself to the university initially as an applied field because you end up on what frankly is the periphery of legitimacy, out there with art education, et cetera, which, great worthy fields, but they do not, they don't have the same centrality. We have to be Caesar's wife. We have to absolutely meet the most conservative norm of academic production because we are looked upon with a certain kind of suspicion. So we have to have an intellectual there, and it's articulating that in, scholarly, not just in everyday language, that gives you the primary legitimacy with colleagues. That is really the basis to getting anywhere with the administration. You've got to look horizontally as well as up in making yourself a safety net.
That's, Jason, since you're at Indiana and you've got, the core there, you've got the BA, which is very unusual, obviously, and the structured MA and PhD programs. What about interdisciplinary activity and outreach from Indiana's point of view, or that kind of program's point of view?
Well, we certainly have the luxury of a long, distinguished history, and we care very much about that legacy. I have to be careful in my comments because ours is a program that's undergoing a series of internal conversations about what the future will hold, which is why I think my colleagues and I find great interest in the discussions here today, because they'll shape more local conversations. All of us are committed to a future, and we're committed to a future in which a thing called folklore is at the center of the matter. But how to operationalize that is an open question. So that if we think about question 4 about a world without PhD programs, I don't think we're going away, but we face new challenges in a world in which we don't have peer programs. Or the peer programs are changing and they don't take the same form that Penn or UCLA, for instance, did. So that's sort of getting ahead of things. I'd want to just, as a caveat, say that I don't feel particularly well prepared to represent an Indiana position, but I am in the mix there, and I'm very interested in where things are headed. I bring to the conversation as much a background as a person who taught as a lone folklorist at the University of Oklahoma as I do, or a folklorist in museum context as I do a faculty member at IU, although I'm very glad to be at IU. In terms of interdisciplinarity, I think one of the places where our program is asking questions about interdisciplinarity is sort of on the flip side, which has to say, as we look ahead to replacing colleagues, which is something we're very eager to do, a number of our current colleagues are already planning to retire within this year or within the next 2 to 3 years, and we can see further out at the 5-year mark and at the 6 or 7-year mark other retirements, which means that there's after a long period of kind of demographic stability, a great period of demographic change in the faculty at IU, we're now looking at the question of, okay, we're going to make compelling arguments to the university to allow us to hire junior colleagues so that they can articulate with the vision of the future. That's the conversation we're having. What will that vision be? But then there's the question of, when we have that vision, what kinds of people out there in the world will we be able to go out and recruit to join the faculty at Indiana University? The conventional answer of the past would have been, well, we want folklore PhDs. I think that there's a strong sense that we would still like to have folklore PhDs, but it's clear that they're not going to be, that's not the only kind of person who in the future we're likely to be recruiting to Indiana, not because we're not committed to folklore PhDs. I think we very much are, but there are limits, right? If we post a job ad and there are no applicants because there are no non-IU PhDs to be had, and our dean tells us you can't keep hiring IU grads, then there's a rubber meets the road problem that we have to deal with, which is to say, what kinds of other folks are doing work that we could incorporate into a project that remains folklore? That's the big question we're having right now, or one of those that we're facing. My hope would be that if we find ourselves incorporating those who were trained outside of the field of folklore, that we can develop strategies for very quickly naturalizing them to the local culture and the national and international culture as well, such that we find new ways of making folklorists, even if sometimes we're making folklorists out of people who already hold a PhD.
Yeah, it sounds like the old problem of Cain and Abel. Who did they marry? And where did they get their wives from? And the dilemma of Indiana producing the only folklore PhDs and then being unable to hire them for a folklore program that's committed to folklore but can't hire folklore PhDs because for the reason that they're the only ones producing.
And this gets us to some of the other questions which have been raised, which is, what on the ground could the society do to advance the state well-being in academic folklore? And the thing that Indiana University needs most are robust folklore programs elsewhere. There needs to be a comparative frame of reference. And so that, I would argue that can be achieved in a number of ways. I mean, all the resources that can go into building up programs that aren't IU are resources well deployed. If there was a means by which we could easily go to a dean or a provost and say, we exist within a robust field that has other, while small relative to economics, still has many players in it, and here's where we compare. A mechanism by which we could do those comparisons would be very useful. In the AFS board report that we just received, there's this discussion of benchmarking. I'm very eager to know what the thinking behind that initiative might be or where that's headed. In some ways, if we could say that categorically there's a better folklore PhD program than the one at IU, that would do a tremendous amount of good, right? If we came out to be ranked number 3 out of 12 or something, we would suddenly have a lot of motivating, on a local level, we'd be able to motivate a lot of interest in advancing our cause. The challenge we face right now is that the frame of reference is hard to map, right? Who do we compare ourselves with and how?
Okay, now, Peggy, again, keep it coming back to the general question of pitfalls and opportunities, which is also circling around outreach and interdisciplinarity, but you don't have to stick to those two things. So the general question, pitfalls and promises.
Yeah. One of the things I always think is a great opportunity for us is our undergraduate programs and the strength of those and making sure that they're strong. For me, that's been very important, making sure that we have an array of offerings. And the numbers, I think, consistently help us as folklorists. I'm sure at your universities like mine, students flock to our courses in great numbers, and those numbers are important to keep track of. They help us argue for that second and third and fourth folklorist. These also are students who can say, oh wow, I'm taking a folklore course as they're sitting in literature or anthropology and sociology. And we were just talking about, and it's just like what we're doing. And I have colleagues who come to me and say, wow, what are you doing in your program? Your students are talking, it fits in with our courses. So I like to think that one of our opportunities does lie in very strong undergraduate programs as our underpinning and moving then, yes, into minors and beyond.
And you actually see your undergraduate program as a form of outreach to
Absolutely.
other departments.
Absolutely. It's the strength of our undergraduate program, which I started with, helped me establish a minor in the college and then a master's program in the college as well. And for me at Mason, that was the trajectory that worked. I think another opportunity for folklore studies that, again, many of us do, but we do it in different areas, is to build those kinds of collaborative frameworks that are strong and continuous and built on our strengths, so that I, for example, have formed really strong relationships with our creative writing programs in poetry, creative nonfiction, and in fiction, as well as our composition program and our literature program. And my colleague, Deborah Schutica, has done the same in Latin American studies, in cultural studies, so that we're on those faculties, we serve in those committees. It's again, yes, it's like how many committees do you want to be a part of? This is, work of great love, because we do serve on many, many more committees to keep our programs healthy and well. But I do think that our undergraduate numbers and collaboration are some of our best opportunities. One of the pitfalls we may not have time to talk about today because it's a whole other subject, but we at Mason are experiencing much greater pressure from human subjects review boards, and long to talk to people about this. If it continues, I'm not sure, for example, that my folklore students can contribute to our archives without going through a full filling out of the full human subjects review protocol. I'm speaking of undergraduates as well. I find this unacceptable. I'm happy for our AFS position on it. But maybe we can have a larger conversation at another time, but I think it's time for much more substantive action on this.
Okay, maybe we'll be able to come back, depending on the time, to the IRBs, which I have a great interest in too. I'm going to ask Pat to forget she's a folklorist for a moment.
I figured that.
And to speak to us as an administrator, and also to forget that she's an administrator at a university that doesn't have a folklore program, and simply to respond to the question of the potential positive aspects and negative sides of folklore from an administrator point of view.
Yeah, I thought I was invited to participate in this panel because I'd served in the administration since 1999 and spent 2 years as the Dean of Humanities, Arts, and Cultural Studies at Davis. And I think the way for me to talk about it is in terms of a department or program that's in your institution's entity that's like Humanities, Arts, and Cultural Studies. And in terms of the kinds of entities that a dean wants to invest in, what Dory said initially is actually, that's what we want. We want that visible, high-functioning academic member, participating in committees, who puts a really good face on their program, because that reflects back on you and your entity as a dean. You want to have an entity or program that's got a good person in a leadership role and the potential for future leaders. I mean, at Davis Humanities, Arts, and Cultural Studies, I had 28 departments or programs under me. The next largest number of departments a dean had was 11. The Dean of Social Sciences had 11. The Dean of Math and Physical Sciences had 5, has 5. The Ag Dean's got about 10, Engineering's got 10. So there are, the entity that you're in is so much larger at most institutions than anything else. There are just lots of efficiencies that make your ability to do your job and represent your faculty the best. And so the way in which the program or the department reflects that efficiency and can have that efficiency is good for you. One of the things that tends to happen, the reason you get to a number like 28, is that faculty will come in and say, you hired me to teach Spanish, but my first love is critical theory. And couldn't we have a program in critical theory or folklore or women's studies? And I'll do everything that you hired me to do for Spanish, and I'll teach a graduate course in critical theory. And we'll just have the Spanish department secretary take care of the administrative stuff. And I'll use the office I have now for both my critical theory and my Spanish department activities. And we can really grow a robust critical theory department because of this. And some softy dean back in history allowed people to do this over and over again. And then those people retire, and you've got graduate and undergraduate courses on your curriculum in critical theory. And suddenly people don't want to teach them on an overload anymore. And suddenly when you have a new secretary to hire, you can't ask her to shoulder this work. So all of a sudden you have these, they're nowhere in your revenue stream. These academic programs are nowhere in your revenue streams, and people have been carrying them. You said love. People have been carrying them because they love them, but the second generation loves their own things. They don't love the stuff that the first generation loves. So you get a whole new group of requests. And so part of what an administrator is doing these days is trying to marshal that. The way you make that strong, the ones that stick, the ones that are going to have tenacity, have what Dory's been talking about. Also, the extent to which you can bring any resources to the table to support yourself and your mission. And I think there are some ways that folklore can do that that critical theory can't. And it doesn't have to always be a lot of resources, but if there's a panache or a name to it. For some reason, administrators love the concept of matching money. Mm-hmm. So somebody will say to you, we could do this great conference if you gave us $100. And it would be really easy for the dean to give you $100. You go, well, if you get 50 from somebody else, I'll do it. And it's just because you've got some other entity to share the commitment with. So the way in which programs and departments can bring some external resources to the challenges of running that program or giving it visibility. Visibility within the university, visibility in the Chronicle of Higher Education, visibility in the New York Times. There's a promotional element that will make those programs stronger. And the important thing too, if you're talking about a PhD program, you're talking about probably a Research One university. And what goes into the mix of value there is sometimes student credit hours. It sounds like at George Mason, student credit hours are really important. All those bodies in those folklore courses are really important. You've got to follow the cycle. So at Davis now, student credit hours aren't all that important. It's not going to get you resources right now to have, we'll tell you, okay, you got 150 students, you've still got to do it with one TA. We just don't have, that's not the value now. Graduate education is. So if I were to get with Jay and say, let's develop folklore at Davis, I wouldn't start with an undergraduate curriculum. I would say, let's do a designated emphasis at the graduate level, try to grow that to a PhD program, and then eventually grow the undergraduate level. But you have to know enough about what your institution is going to invest in. And if you do that, go to them with money from someplace else and say, this is going to cost you. You can't do this cheap. I'm not teaching these courses on overload. And I'm not making our secretary, that's what the scientists do. They never go in and go, oh, genomics, it's a labor of love. You gotta let me. They built genomics by saying, genomics is the frontier of science, and that's, really, where you're gonna have to put your money. Be very aware and selective. You can tell me to shut up at any point, Elliott. It's never stopped you before.
Yeah.
But be very selective about those committees that we all do, and certainly the ones that have strategic planning, academic planning, mission, vision, anything like that. Try to get a folklorist on those groups. Those
I think
are really
curriculum
important.
is important too.
Again, and it depends on your institution. Okay,
Okay, yes, when they appointed me moderator, I was given to understand I was supposed to allow people to get a word in edgewise. But clearly it's escaped beyond that. In terms of outreach, I think something that hasn't been mentioned but should be is that there are a number of folklore programs that actually have a public sector outreach aspect to them. There's Traditional Arts Indiana at Indiana. There's the Center for the Study of the Upper Midwestern Cultures at Wisconsin, at Louisiana Lafayette. There's the Creole, what's the name of it?
They do the Creole Studies and the Center for Louisiana Studies.
Right, and these involve outreach into the community, which seems to me, my feedback from those very people is that this puts a very good face for folklore studies into the at least lower levels of the university administration, because public universities are enjoined to have some kind of public face and to do something for the public. So we actually haven't talked, we might want to talk a little bit about just that kind of public outreach.
Probably the most significant political accomplishment for our department this past year was having the governor's wife judge the Indiana Fiddle Contest via Traditional Arts Indiana. That's the kind of thing that goes a long way in the dean's office and at higher levels, and that we're finding that having the public sector wing in our program is doing a tremendous amount of good. Obviously, it has obvious advantages with respect to training students for careers in the public sector, but it has these kinds of benefits that are being talked about. And the way that we can describe that is to say, we have many great programs on our campus, but there are certain constituencies, certain communities that only we have access, and only we have the ability to engage them in the work of the university, and thus we have a valuable role to play institution-wide. So for us, that kind of initiative is crucial. Very few arts and sciences departments can claim that much community engagement.
So this is a definite plus for folklore in the university structure, if it's handled well, if it's not done to the extent that it impacts the program we were talking about and the quality of the scholarship that's being produced.
And this gets us to the way in which that's funded is, again, in a joint funding initiative with the Indiana Arts Council, so that basically it's coming to the university with half the thing funded and saying, for half of the cost of this, all these advantages accrue to the university.
Elliott, one of the things that we work on a lot is our internships, and being in Washington, D.C., it's a real opportunity for us to, because we want our students to be learning about public sector, active in public sector, and working with them. I've also started an initiative at our university. We'd like to be able to hire or work with the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian and perhaps do a joint hire and keep forming our relationships in the university, but also in folklore with Washington institutions. And as we grow and build, our eye is always on that. One of the things I wanted to talk about later, but maybe I'll just mention it now when we think about what AFS can do, what we may want to grow in. I would love to be able to have grants or AFS help even at establishing team teaching opportunities so that colleagues from other universities or from public institutions could come and team teach courses to make larger our program for public folklorists to come and, say, spend an entire semester at our university. I would very much love to have one of my colleagues teaching, having time for research, working with all of us. It's those kinds of things that we very much want to go forward with.
Okay, one of the things I haven't heard mentioned here, everybody, and this is the trouble with folklorists, they're so damn positive, is clearly the problems that the pitfalls that folklore has, which I don't think we can get into at length but I just want to mention them and just touch and ask about one. The problems that we regularly encounter are, 1, our name, 2, our definition, 3, our focus. So, you can tell me what our focus is after you look at the program this year or last year or any other year. And there's no point, I think, at this point trying to have a discussion about that. But there is one other thing that was brought up. We were talking about the interdisciplinary outreach and connections in the university. It's clearly not enough to simply say, I know about English literature too. So the question is, what is the added value that folklore studies brings to these other fields? Can we? I don't think we're necessarily going to answer it now, but it seems to me that the value of these interdisciplinary connections is that we can say we bring something else to the table that that isn't being looked at. And can we characterize it? Does it turn out to be the same added value we were talking about in the last session? Is it simply local knowledge? Or is there something more specific we can characterize, or even more general than that, in terms of what we bring to other disciplines?
I think we have to be hyper-specific. One of the things that occurred to me this morning during the public sector panel is that folklorists should all have, a public policy panel, folklorists should all have a menu of what they call in business schools elevator speeches. And that's the ability to communicate in the length of time it takes an elevator to get from the top floor to the bottom floor, what you do and what your field is about. And we should have, each one of us should have those for folklore. And you need more than one, actually, because it depends on what elevator you're in. It's very difficult for folklorists to be self-promotional, for some of us to be self-promotional. I've gotten better at it over the years, but it can be really difficult. If you can't do it on your own behalf, do it for other folklorists. So I am Jay Meckling's biggest advocate at UC Davis. And when my colleagues in nutrition are talking about the problem of childhood obesity, I start talking about children's folklore and the kind of things that Jay does research on with play and with children's games and attitudes towards food, and say that if you want to really think about solving the problem of childhood obesity, knowing how they play, knowing what's important to them, what the rules of their games are, might be an important component of that. And then the elevator door shuts and they go, hey, how do we find that Meckling guy? And he's the biggest advocate for me. So that at the upper echelon sort of the university, everybody knows Jay and Pat. The chancellor, the board, we've made each other visible, and I think in all of our separate sort of worlds, that's what we have to do. If I'm not going to promote myself, I did my elevator speech about my own work, when I went to Louisiana in conjunction with the anniversary of Hurricane Katrina to collect contemporary legends that are circulating there. And I sort of said in an elevator, if you think you can rebuild the city without understanding that most of the black community thinks those levees were breached on purpose, and I can help you get, I'm trying to get at that, they go, oh, yeah, you're right. And so I think that that's a real part of what we have to do. And let your campus news office know that you're doing it. Every campus of any size has a news office. And as dean, I sat down once a quarter with the humanities, arts, and cultural studies person, and she said to me, what are your faculty doing? What can I get a story out of? So I need the faculty to tell me that, or the department chairs to tell me that, or have a way of saying, this is what's going on, and this is what's relevant, and folklorists need to be on those pages. And we've got such great stories.
Dory, did you have anything to say about added value here?
Yeah, you have to be careful in saying things like, I know about English literature too, because I did in fact try out that tactic early on and found out that it was not useful. You need to pose yourself as being complementary. You're not doing the same thing, you're doing something that kind of fills a gap. And so that depends. If you're talking to cultural studies, let's say, your close neighbors can be your most difficult neighbors. I really think it's a lot easier to talk to a political scientist in some ways than it is to a cultural anthropologist. So we at Ohio State have no cultural anthropology. That's a useful disciplinary ecology for us in some ways, unfortunate in others, but we have a lot of very high theory cultural studies people with whom we are involved in this Department of Comparative Studies, and what we've really had to do is say, yeah, we're interested in a lot of the same questions, but we are coming at them from a more, empirical ground than you are. We are coming from a basis of the local discourses, the local categories, and we're building up from that ground, and we hope to meet you in the middle somewhere. We are building building blocks that you can then, think with in a different fashion. Or we can take your question. You have to talk about it as being not the same enterprise. In terms of what we say about definitions, the two things that, I've gotten it down to to a top-down and a bottom-up definition of folklore. So for the bottom-up definition, vernacular communication, or some phrase like this. I thought Dick Bauman's Philology of the Vernacular last year was really a perfectly useful way of talking about the long inheritance of the discipline, and really one we want to maintain. And I think there we say to the English department, we say to people studying art, we say to religious studies, etc., underneath these formalized, institutionalized genres is a ground of vernacular communication from which this stuff arose. And we have been studying that over the long term. It's very important not to disown the past of the field. We have been looking at how this stuff moves through time and space for all of this time, and we have built up, a body of knowledge on the mechanics of how culture works at the lower levels. So that's one sort of story. Another sort of story, which I tell quite a lot because of our associations with political scientists, is folklore is a primary discourse of political representation and legitimation, not only in the period of nation states, but right now under globalization, where the names, are changing to things like heritage and world culture and so forth. But basically, folklore was, Valdemar talked of this history, folklore was the political discourse that was used to incorporate the periphery into the nation state, right? This is how you got Wales to be part of the United Kingdom. This is how you gave the provinces a way of belonging to the nation. And it is happening in a rather parallel fashion now in the process of globalization, that culture, heritage, etc., is the way that the developing world is getting incorporated into the global economy. And we are able to look back and deconstruct and critique this process because we were involved, we invented it. You use the stigma of the field, you kind of use the past of the field to say, we have analyzed the old mistakes that were made in these kinds of discourses of cultural essentialism and origins and so forth. And we can look at them now and sort of see where this discourse is coming from and talk about how it needs to be challenged or revised or whatever. So if you talk about folklore as the inner other of modernity, you know, there's a phrase you can use with certain kinds of scholars, you know, and talk about the complementarity, again, of folklore as the sphere of everything that is not modern, everything that is not the focal parts of society. You know, we are the great unmarked. I think everybody is becoming aware that they have to deal with that, and it came up, I think, with Patricia and whoever it was responding to her, talking about this issue of how you get the top-down colleagues on board. They might think of it as non-compliance or recalcitrance. Why don't these people want to be introduced into the global economy? Why don't they want to embrace democracy? We can talk about having the expertise in those local resistances, and so we're bringing something they don't do and don't have.
Okay, we're running out of time, but we started a little late. But I do want to ask each one of the panelists, except Peggy, who already actually spoke to this question, if the AFS could do something for your program, what would it be? And to finish it off with Pat, to say, as an administrator, where does an organization like AFS, or how can an organization like AFS fit into the purview of an administrator, and positively or negatively, if that's what it would turn out to be? So why don't we start with you? What do you think, if perhaps there's nothing, could the AFS do anything for folklore at University of Oregon without listing little things?
Yes, and the AFS already has done that. We're in a process of formalizing what was considered an interdisciplinary, it was called IS Folklore, Interdisciplinary Studies Folklore, and we're now just wanting to call it Folklore. And so Tim sent a letter, quite a number of people. Bill Ivey sent a letter. So we have now a stack of letters that we are putting forward with this, which I think is very significant. We put on the 1993 AFS meeting, which I thought at the time was very important. The problem is now it's so many years later, we have to do it again. You know, I mean, these are things that people forget, and you have new administrators. But having the national meeting there and having the national meeting in Portland, I personally thought was extremely important. And some people did walk over and actually see what it was we were doing. So we had the visibility. Visibility is a kind of a two-way street. It depends on how recent it is. So I've had my work in the Chronicle, you've had your work in the Chronicle. The New York Times is a great place. I haven't made it there yet.
No, but what could the AFS
but so
do?
these are all things that
But the AFS can help you get there.
yeah, they can help you get there, I think, because they're, as far as the world is concerned, they are the big organization. And so they need to let people know that we're available, and I'm sure that we once had a list, and this came up this morning too, we once had a list of all of the different things that people could do or be contacted about. And that worked. So that if someone wanted to know about film and folklore, they could look it up and say, oh, Sherry Sherman knows about film and folklore, we'll call her. And I've gotten some calls like that. And I think that happens for all of us, depending on our specialties. And so that's a good thing that AFS can do. I think the society, to me, the society is, the core, for at least for me, of what it is I do. And to get off the topic for 1 second, but it's still on the topic, I always call myself a folklorist. I've never called myself anything else. And if we want to have folklore, and we want to give degrees in folklore, we need to be able to offer degrees in folklore, and we need to be able to hire people with PhDs in folklore. Otherwise, why are we giving PhDs in folklore? I feel really strongly about this.
Yeah,
So I just wanted to say that. And I also want to say, because Diane is sitting here, is that there is another PhD program, and that's at Memorial.
Yeah.
Let me just...
University of Alberta.
Okay. Jason, could the AFS do anything for Indiana?
I was thinking about this. The first panel this morning started spending money, which we don't yet have, doing wonderful new things. It's easy to fall into that impulse. I hope we can find the money that we need to do the things we would like to do. I think we're in a moment right now in which I would say that academic folklore is in a more precarious spot than public folklore. I don't want to essentialize those differences because I don't think that they're healthy, and I think that we're at our best when we're mixing it up. But I think that academic folklore needs some intervention. I've already alluded to the fact that IU really needs some strong rivals in order to push our work forward. And so that for me, I would ask the question, well, what ways could AFS do this? Again, the board report that we have in the newsletter, I think there's a lot of really strong ideas implied in that document. I look forward to seeing what is underneath them. But for a time, there was this public folklorist in residency program, which from a distance seemed like a really robust idea. And I would be in favor of such a thing. At this stage, though, I would actually be in favor as well, or perhaps even first, with something like a postdoctoral fellowship that is awarded competitively to any program that's about to make a break, which is to say AFS working with Mellon or other kinds of funders, raising the capital for either a term period or better yet an endowed position to be able to say, okay, the folklore program that's about to make a break and that could go from the MA level to the PhD program in a kind of competitive framework makes a case we need another person here on our campus. If we get a good person for 2 years, that will enable us to shore things up and to get a permanent line and thereby go from being an MA program to a PhD program. I would be in favor of exploring something that looks something like that. It would have another advantage at the level of our graduates, which is to say that I think that the climate that we're in now is that there are those working towards getting a PhD in folklore or who have recently got a PhD in folklore who are fantastically bright and who have all kinds of new ideas and skills that can change and improve the health of academic folklore as an enterprise. But they perhaps graduated exactly the wrong moment in which there's no job to be had. 2 years later, there's a job, but that person's already gone into some other domain. So that were we to have a postdoc that comes open every year or every 2 years or something, that could strengthen, and I'm focusing here on graduate programs. I agree that undergraduate programs are crucial, but from where I sit, graduate programs are fundamental to the state of things.
Okay, let me stop you there. Dory, do you have a quick comment?
Two, student recruitment. Helping to there are great undergraduate programs where people come out and know what folklore is, but we need a wider pool to recruit for quality and diversity in the field. I think one thing AFS could do is launch an effort targeted at undergraduates, both the best undergraduates, honors programs all over the place, and to historically black colleges, border colleges, inner city colleges, places where we can begin to rebuild diversity in the field from the bottom. So student recruitment at the graduate level, because reproducing the graduate programs is what's critical now. The other thing is simply helping the field to capitalize on its cumulative knowledge, countering this centrifugal tendency that we are all talking to our own milieus, none of us know what each other are publishing. We need to foster intellectual engagement. One happy thing we think is about to happen due to the friendship of our Estonian colleagues is that HFolk, an HNet list in folklore, we hope will be launched shortly. But what AFS could also do, I don't know that we need more symposiums on the state of the field, but I think we could have symposia on what happens after heritage protection, or what's at stake in the definition of folk, or what do we know now about the tradition process, or what is the non-Habermasian public sphere. I think we could have symposia, perhaps on Wednesday before AFS, dealing with the stuff. And really trying to synthesize what we have learned about these sort of core notions of, the folk or the vernacular, performance, tradition, etc.
Okay, thank you. And I'd like to close with...
One thing.
No.
It's really important.
It's not important. Believe me, it's not important.
In order to do their research in ways that it makes our lives so much easier. But we can still pull it off without a multi-million-dollar grant. They can't. And so, I think this is part exactly of something that's very much on Bill's agenda in terms of shoring up the national endowments, working with the Fund for Folk Culture, just the kind of thing we're doing today, those kinds of things that will get us with the foundations, more kinds of resources. The scholarly societies doing that works well back at the institutional level. Being supportive, what we've got here is a wonderful luxury of a kind of a smallness. Although I always brag about how large the society is, you should always do that back on your campus. Talk about how many people were at the meeting, talk about how large the membership is, because you need to really look big there. But when I was nominating Jay for the most significant prize that our campus offers, Mike Jones, I think you were president then, Mike wrote a letter. When he got it, Bill wrote a congratulatory letter back. Really being able, sort of at the local level, you know, Sharon talked about, I needed this from them. She knew who to get in touch with, she got it back. I needed something from them, I sent off the email, I got it back. And so both being able to help us on that sort of micro level, but also representing us in terms of the larger institutions out there who have resources that could be helpful to folklore is what I think we need from the society.
Just one last quick question is, in your experience as an administrator, does any other national organization have visibility on campus in a way that influences at all what's going on campus, like the American Historical Association or the American Anthropological Association? Do these associations have any kind of visibility at administrative levels? I mean, the answer could easily be no.
As an entity, there's not that visibility, but if you're trying to do something for a particular faculty member or particularly concentration, and you've got the imprimatur of that scholarly society, it meant a big deal in Jay's case that he was a member of the Folklore Fellows. And you and I know the fellows have lunch together once a year, and that's about the extent.
And they don't do that very well.
But the fact that I'm like, well, you know, they've got a fellows organization there, and he's a member of that, that had a panache. And so if we were to say, I don't know, childhood obesity or whatever, and that was a priority of the professional society, and that dovetailed with what a campus was doing, they go, yeah, that's a big group, and we want the UC Davis people to be important in that group.
Okay. Well, I know you'll be able to say something probably in the course of the discussion.
Sure, you betcha.
No matter what.
No matter, no matter.
And if not, after we're all gone, feel free. But I think it is time to open this conversation up to a lot of people who I know are interested in this topic. And I think Diane is going to make the first question, comments, and then people may line up as they did before and put their proverbial 2 cents in.
First responder on there really means the plant question to get us all started. So I want to start, though, by saying thank you to everybody for your comments. And it's really interesting, especially to see all of your very different situations and to be able to hear your ideas from your very different situations. I should have said I'm Diane Goldstein from Memorial University, and thank you, Sharon, for your plug for Memorial. And Jason, we can send you all of the PhDs you would like to hire.
Well, let's hope we have openings.
The question that I have, or comment that I have, and this is open to anybody, is it seems to me, and I think Patricia alluded to this, that we need to be able to think about where we're going with the strength of our programs and how to make our programs stronger by thinking about student demographics and where they're going in terms of, you know, numbers, undergrad, grad, in terms of where our programs are and what are our most successful programs. So I'm not just thinking about demographics, but also issues like Dory alluded to with globalization, of kind of where can we put our energies in terms of where fundable thinking is going, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at. And this strikes me particularly because we recently had a review at Memorial of our academic program. Erica Brady was one of our reviewers, and she commented that the strongest programs in folklore lately have tended to be the programs with a really strong regional base. And I think that's a really important comment, and I think that there are other comments that we can make about things that are feeding into the places where our strongest programs are and the places where we're making the biggest jumps. And so I just open that up as a comment or question to anybody up there.
I think regionalism is very important, and it's certainly been important at our university. And our archive is called the Archive of Northwest. It's Northwest folklore, so the emphasis is definitely there. And I believe that that does make a difference, and that people see that. And the archive is about, as big as this, but it sounds very large, and people respect that and they respond to it. So I think that's true. And we send people out. We don't send them, but the Oregon Committee for the Arts and so on, they have chautauquas that people go out on, and many of the folklorists go out and talk to people in far-flung, small towns. So that gives us greater visibility, and gives the university greater visibility.
The regional base is what really helps with outreach, obviously. Outreach is harder at a kind of place where the faculty research is abroad and so forth. But again, you can think about niches in different programs here. What we have to say, because of what our faculty do, is we want to revitalize the international comparative agenda. That's what we're doing in the field, as opposed to excellent regional programs. If you think about a disciplinary ecology in which we can all claim a certain kind of niche, then that helps all of us.
I wanted to say something too, that the regional is important for us in an urban-suburban setting. We've had a lot of interest in our archives as well. People do a rash of articles each year, which is wonderful, newspapers coming in. And one of the things that they're interested in is that we do serve as a resource base for the area, and that local people from the community can come and learn more about the groups right there, in Northern Virginia, and come and use our archives to both learn and also send things to us that we can preserve for them.
I've always been in favor of the word folklore prominently in every kind of context, but I wonder whether it isn't politic for certain programs in certain areas to play on the regional thing by renaming themselves such things as folklore and the ethnography of the Intermountain West, or folklore and the ethnography of the Northwest, or folklore and urban ethnography, in ways that you actually bring that regional connection to the forefront and wind up with a term that helps illuminate folklore a little bit and brings cachet to the word folklore in a way that's graspable both at the local level and at the university level. Anybody else want to comment on that?
Not everyone on your faculty may have that interest. So
no. But if you've got that regional archive, for example,
yes,
then of course it makes a certain sense to use it. Otherwise, it becomes something almost of a weight.
Hi, I'm Elaine Lawless, and I'm at the University of Missouri, and I want to nominate Missouri as a competitor to Indiana just for the sake of argument. I'm halfway teasing, but I also think that we've built an incredible program at Missouri, and I wanted to say we've done it within an English department. And the reason some of you alluded to, that one of the good reasons to do that is because it's much harder to axe an English department than it is a folklore program. But also we've integrated it with the English department, with literature, with composition and rhetoric and theory, and I'm trying to think of all the other areas that we've integrated it with. And we certainly do build our program as a program that adds new tools to their sort of toolbox. And that, if they have all these ways of reading literature, wait a minute, there's one more way. There's several other ways to do that. We're also graduating lots of students. We have students at every level, undergraduate, master's, and PhD. We're graduating them, and they're getting really, really good jobs. And one of the reasons they're getting good jobs is because they have a lot of different talents. They can go into a situation and say, I'm a generalist. I can teach American Lit. I can teach some critical theory. Oh, and by the way, I can build an amazing folklore program for you. I can teach ethnic studies. They really go in with a multitude of skills. And the other thing we have is that we do internships with the Missouri Folk Arts Program. And what Lisa Higgins and Debbie Bailey is doing with the Missouri Folk Arts Program, which is now under Arts and Science in the museum, allows our students to get out into the field and to learn the really nuts and bolts and go out and do field work, do research, and then some of our graduates, Lisa Ratchey sitting behind me, getting fabulous jobs in those areas. And so I would say that we're the strongest because we're linked to a very strong English department, and we've made a commitment to our position in that department. And that's not to say we don't have to fight for it. But the flip side of that, too, is that the people we hire look like the people we graduate. And what I mean by that is that it's very hard for me to argue for a full-time folklorist. We want to hire another full-time folklorist at Missouri. But if creative writing is also bringing someone in, if Caribbean studies is bringing someone else in, if composition is bringing someone else in, and I know there are people out there who can do that and do folklore. The key is to get people who can do more than one thing. And so the multiplicity of the graduates we're graduating also comes back home to us. So now, last year we hired Joanna Hearn, who does folklore and film and indigenous studies, and the enhancement to our program is just unbelievable. We've got Anand Prahlad, who came in as a poet, African-American poet, and a folklorist. Our program grows because we're not sticking to any very solid, strict definition of folklore, but we're enlarging that, and our students are also enlarging that, and our connection with the folk arts program is so invaluable. So I think all of that is what I would like to add to this conversation, and so we'll vie with you if you want. I'm teasing.
That's exactly what I was advocating. The point that I was not making as well as I would like is, thank goodness we're not the only program, and what we need to be viable are more programs that are doing more different things, so that, thank goodness, we're not the only place to get a PhD in folklore. If there were 5 more that were really pushing on us, that would make our arguments more compelling. If you look at my colleagues before I arrived there, made this change, which some of you, and Alan Dundas mentioned this in his lecture to us a few years ago, this changed from Folklore Institute to Department of Folklore and Ethnomusicology. Some people read that, I think, as a sign of loss. But it was an intentional decision by our colleagues to make the program less subject to being wiped away quickly. It's harder to destroy a department than it is to destroy some anomalous thing called an institute or a program or something. And so that they made a decision to ally more formally with the ethnomusicologists to make something that would be more durable. If you look, though, our university has guidelines for dismantling a department. And I think everyone, if such a thing exists at your institution, you should know what it looks like. Ours,
It's really hard.
Well, ours basically lays out a set of guidelines which say, how many peer programs are there? If there's some dean can impose any threshold he or she wants for how many are enough to make this worth going forward with. So, this is why I make this point that the more strong programs we have, in whatever form they take, the stronger our chances of moving ahead are.
This may be one of the things that AFS can also help in. AFS can write letters to the institutions that are on the verge of or trying to get a PhD or are close enough to getting a PhD. We certainly are in that position. But to say the flagship institution, the mothership, has said we need more people out there. We believe your institution is a good institution. we really support and advocate for a PhD at your institution. That may also be something AFS could do.
I'm Keith Ludden. I'm the Community Arts and Traditional Arts Associate for the Maine Arts Commission. And I have what I think is a two-pronged question. One is, are there untapped opportunities for academic institutions to partner with local and state agencies? And if so, can those partnerships also strengthen the academic programs? For example, I manage the traditional arts program at the Maine Arts Commission, but I have limits on the time I can spend in the field. It would be extremely useful for me to have, say, interns or that sort of thing to work with. Are there untapped possibilities there?
We do have people who have interned at the Oregon Folk Life Commission, and so that does work very well. And many of those people are the people who've gotten a very good job.
We do that a lot.
It's a question of the spirit being willing, but the schedule being full. And that means that you have to have the people at the university setting whose baby this absolutely is. So that we have, for example, Katie Borland out on the Newark campus of Ohio State, who has done vigorous outreach both in Nicaragua, but has also partnered locally with the Native American community and a project on her regional campus to do oral history there. So you have to have, I think it really has to be led by somebody's research, because otherwise there is not going to be the guiding spirit to follow through or to bring students into it. So if you have the right people in the academic program who are going to be engaged enough to keep the thing going, I think the things are easy to, there are untapped opportunities and many would be easy to start, but finding the ones that are going to be sustainable because a couple of people really have a burning investment in it is the challenge.
And could I say one thing about it's an opportunity and it's also a pitfall, because in many institutions, this can vary, internships are unpaid labor for professors, so that you've got to decide if you're going to do any, how many you can do. We've tried to argue for, X number of internships or independent studies that you do equals one course that you teach. But we have consistently failed to, win our administrators over to that. So when you're asking for internships, it's a wonderful idea, and you need to be aware too of what you're asking.
Does the benefit increase if the relationship is with a specific institution and a specific agency?
Certainly it promotes an economical sort of arrangement. And there's not relearning new agencies constantly. So that partnerships seem, I think most institutions would say a durable, significant, ongoing partnership is in many ways administratively preferable to something new coming from 12 directions every semester. Mm-hmm. From my point of view, one of the advantages here is that these kinds of, in addition to their training function, these kinds of opportunities can potentially support students. A big, and this goes all the way back, a huge problem in our program is the inability to fund first-year graduate students. And there's structural, historical, and economic reasons why that's a problem. We're starting to chip away at it largely through things like Traditional Arts Indiana, which has opened up graduate student assistantships that didn't previously exist to put our students to work in public projects. I added a journal which brought an assistantship with it. It's being targeted towards first-year students so that we can reproduce our project as well as do good work in the world.
Institutions can also put a class in, kind of open-ended class that they call internship. And students then will come to you and say, well, I see there's an internship here listed. What are some of the things I could do to take that particular course? And we always say, go and do something for the Oregon Folklife Commission. So if you have that listed, you don't have to sell it. The student will come and sell it to you.
Thanks.
I'm Galit Chazan Rokem from the Hebrew University in Jerusalem with some academic experience in the United States and Europe too. And I want to make as short comments as I can about our program with reference to specific points that have been raised here. We have first of all, the name of the program, and that refers to that local, regional, is Jewish and Comparative Folklore Program. It's related to as a department, and it really doesn't matter if it's a department or program at this stage, not for the dismantling and not for the kind of respect or funding that we're able to get. The comparative folklore that we teach is Israeli-Palestinian folklore, which is the most relevant and the closest, and also gives jobs to our Palestinian students. Now, we have an undergraduate program that I think circa 12 people graduate from every year, a major. Many, many more people who take it as minors, about 30 or 40. We have an interdisciplinary MA program, however, the word folklore is written on their diploma, and a PhD in folklore. The MA has about 5 to 7 graduates every year. Interesting hirings has been, for instance, an expert for folk art for Sotheby's. The local Sotheby's has hired one of our graduates, for instance. Circa 3 graduates from the folklore program every year. Most of those go to local institutions. We have had some people hired abroad, not at folklore programs though. The good news is we had an international review committee of the humanities, Faculty of Humanities last year, people from Stanford, Princeton, Harvard, Oxford, Cambridge, Bochum, etc., etc. One of the recommendations was large folklore. It's important. So I think I'm mentioning this because since most of these people came from the United States, I think it's good news for you that there is this kind of review committee that comes from here, comes to our university, looks at what happens, and thinks folklore is something which is worthwhile investing in. I'm now, this semester at Berkeley, I'm not authorized to speak in the name of Charles Briggs, who couldn't come here for several reasons. But I think I could formulate it weakly that there is an urge towards a PhD program in Berkeley at this moment. So I hope it happens, really. And I think that postdoc that you suggested, co-funded with AFS some way, take Pat's word that if you bring $100, the authorities will give 500 for this kind of, and I think it's worthwhile to invest, because we had a difficult experience trying to find a postdoc position for a student of mine in Jerusalem, whom some of you maybe know, Bugwa, who was at one of the AFS in Rochester, I think. He's back at Kenya with a tenured position at an English department, but he would have, I think he would have had a lot of use, and I think the department that would have hosted him would have found it really useful to have him for a year. He's a great specialist on African folklore, really. Now, one thing among many that I think is a good thing to do is to publish in non-folklore journals and to make a lot of footnotes that refer to folklore journals, so that those people who read the history and the literature journals, etc., get those references and find that the references are really smart. I think that's important since we have good folklore journals. We need people from the outside read them. Also, I think international contacts, not surprising, I'm going to I'm going to recommend international connections. They're very important for crediting. I mean, in a small country like ours, without international recommendations, nobody gets anything. No tenures, no promotions, nothing. But I think they're important everywhere, and I think that letters that have been written to other places have been useful. And I want to tell you that the International Society of Folk Narrative Research, which is called narrative research, but is really a folklore association because it deals with other fields of folklore as much as with narrative today. Some people think it's terrible, I think it's good. Has its first conference this September in the Western Hemisphere, namely in Santa Rosa de las Pampas in Argentina. I know it's far away, but if people can go there, I think it's very, very important. And I recommend that you enter the website, the new website that comes out of Estonia of the ISFNR. It has the first preliminary circular of that conference. I think it's really important. It's a very international crowd. Africa, Asia, Europe, West and East, and South America are represented in that. And I think, again, if you can't mention many PhD programs in the United States, I think the fact that you can mention PhD programs in Europe and in Asia, we're in Asia, I think it's useful. And there are in places in Asia. China. You know, they're numerous. Just dig them up. So the last thing I want to mention is that I think, the one before last, one thing is modularity. We're a folklore program, but I have part of my position, for instance, in literature. So there's this modularity, which I think becomes more and more popular with the administrators, clusters, and people need, the programs need to move in and out, not to be static. And I think in that we have something to contribute, because the internal contradiction between the structure of knowledge of the university, which is hierarchic, and the internal structure of knowledge in folklore, which is non-hierarchic, which has hurt folklore for so many, many, many years, I think can be used now. Because we have knowledge about non-hierarchic structures, about modularity, about moving in and out, about something that we can contribute to the thinking about the university as a structure of knowledge. So, thank you.
Just before Jim asks his question, many of the things that people have suggested are things that cost money, postdocs, visiting professorships. The American Folklore Society now has an endowment, and people sitting in this room have to think about contributing to it. And figuring out how they can do that, because eventually that's how folklore will be continued. That's how your legacy will be remembered. You know, who's going to remember our work except the American Folklore Society? Ultimately, that they're going to be. So these programs, there has to be payment for these as well, not just taking.
I'm Jim Leary from the Folklore program at the University of Wisconsin, and I want to bring up a couple of things. One, following what Elliott had to say, I'm really thrilled that Metin Ekisi from the Ege University in Izmir, Turkey, is going to be here at the meeting, and he got a special committee PhD in folklore at University of Wisconsin 10 years ago, and I was astounded in talking with him the other day to find out that he has 90 graduate students in folklore at the Ege University, people from all over the Turkic areas of Central Asia, and he's not only written some basic textbooks on fieldwork and folklore terminology as well as individual studies, but has begun to translate a number of classic American folklore essays into Turkish, and so it's just another example of some of these programs, and I think it makes us consider that we are, of course, a global discipline, and our peer universities are not only in the United States. This regional issue was brought up before, and certainly where we are as the major state university, it's a really important issue, and it's one we've been able to work with a lot as folklorists. Not only with regard to making contact with the community, what gets considered to be outreach, but also in curricular offerings. Ruth Olson does actually an online course that has consistently drawn over 100 students, with many of them being graduate students from all across campus, not only in letters and science, but in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences, and it's called Local Culture and Identity in the Upper Midwest. And as an online course, it draws a lot on fieldwork materials that have come out of many public programs. So she's able to put on there excerpts from radio programs or videos or films, as well as images from fieldwork. And that has, in turn, enabled us to work a lot with the general library system that's interested in developing its archival collections and creating online sorts of materials. And for a long time, our music library has had a special focus on traditional and ethnic music from the region as their major collecting area. At the same time, though, regionalism can bring with it an equation with parochialism, and that's something that we're constantly being aware of and addressing. And in concocting the theme for this meeting, Homelands and Diasporas, it really is kind of a reflection of what we're trying to call attention to, and that is that every place is in its own way the center of the world and it's connected to every other place. And by doing local work in profound ways, you're connecting with people all over the world because of the indigenous populations that have moved around and European settlers and African Americans who were brought in over on and on and on. And so those kinds of connections we can make pretty profoundly. One last thing a number of people have talked about, and Jason brought up this whole thing about benchmarks and so forth. And we have an undergraduate certificate program. We have a PhD minor. We have a special committee PhD that a student already admitted to some other graduate program can kind of petition for and put together. And we've just developed a PhD concentration within Scandinavian studies. So you can get a PhD in Scandinavian studies with a folklore concentration. But because we're not a formal MA granting program and not one that can admit our own graduate students, we're not regularly or periodically reviewed by the deans and so forth. And I think it would be helpful for us and perhaps for other programs, maybe like yours, Peggy, or whatever, that are in somewhat similar situations for, I mean, this again might cost some money, but for AFS to, maybe have a couple of emeritus faculty from such and such place or whoever they might be, come and evaluate our program, because we can make the case internally for where we think we fit and what we think we need, but it would help to have some kind of external evaluation as well, and that would be good for us all. Thank you.
Okay, I'm Betsy Peterson. I actually have a question about cultural diversity of the student populations that you recruit. I know myself as a potential employer of students in the field that I am increasingly getting pressured, and in applications that I write from foundations, increasingly there are all sorts of benchmarks and things I have to hit in terms of diversity of whatever project I'm doing, diversity of my board, diversity of staff, diversity, and not just cultural diversity, I mean diversity across a range of sort of markers. I'm curious to hear from people at any of the academic programs within the university setting. Is there any, what sort of discussion or conversation is happening about what the student population is going to look like 10, 20, 30 years out, and is there any incentive for academic programs to diversify? I mean, I know many of us give lip service to this sort of discussion, but how are universities kind of truly grappling with that? I mean, I think for many people in public programs and outside the university, I mean, these issues will become increasingly important for us and important in our hiring, and I'm just curious to see what academic programs, how you all are sort of dealing or thinking about that. So.
I think we're all under that same gun of how many people do you have, what programs are they in, what ethnic groups do they belong to, and the truth of the matter has been, and I've been a member of the society for 30 years, that we have never had a large population, a diverse population of people from what the universities call peoples of color. We've had some, but not as many as would be proportionate to an institution of this size. And why that is, I don't know. And I know we've worked on it. I was on the board, and we talked about it a lot, but nothing came of it. We're ecstatic this year that we have someone at Oregon, which is very white, that we have a black student. This is like, wow, how did this happen? I mean, we were so happy just to keep Ed Coleman all the years that we had him there, that he didn't leave because it's just so incredibly white. So it's a tough situation. I don't know the answer to it, but yes, we are asked by universities to deal with that problem, to address that problem, to write reports about that, and to turn it from a problem into something that is not a problem.
California is, of course, California. The programs that, ironically, that I was able to take advantage of to get into and through graduate school are now illegal in California, so that the pressures still exist. But any kind of incentive, bad word, any kind of incentive, any kind of a strategy that's used to single out any underrepresented population is discouraged, and there are, there are anti-diversity police everywhere. Making sure, we had a program we really wanted underrepresented minority students to take advantage of. Of course, it had to be available to all of the students. We wanted to do one more mailing to underrepresented minority students to get, and the anti-diversity police got wind of that and couldn't even do an additional mailing. But on the other hand, we constantly get the party line about the significance, and it's obviously very important to many of us, but it's California.
Can I just add something? That I don't want to make it seem like Indiana has made strong enough efforts in this regard. I don't think that it has. But there's a factor that is at play in our institution which may not be characteristic of others. But over the last several years, a third or more of our graduate students come from overseas, and they return overseas. That's not to say we're doing all that we should as a society or as a department relative to these questions, but our student body is quite diverse, in a certain sense at least, internationally. And that has had tremendous benefits for us on a local level in terms of, it's extremely unusual relative to the other departments on campus, which means that we're seen as having an international effect. Very few departments at Indiana University can reasonably say we're impacting the world, but we're fortunate in that regard. I think that, and this gets to a point that was made a little while ago, that is going to serve us well in the next generation when the students of those students start coming back and reinvigorating programs in the United States. So that I look forward to that point.
And it all depends where your university is. At California State University, 1/3 of our enrollment or more, to 40%, was Latino. Another third was Asian, from a variety of Asian countries. Maybe 9% black. So when you got to that category that people are so fond of calling white, there were very few people there. So it's a completely different kind of picture depending on where your university is located.
Well, actually, I had just a suggestion for AFS and what AFS might do, and actually this might also be something that addresses this problem of recruiting students. I don't know about you, but when I told my mother I was going to get a graduate degree in folklore, she said, well, what the hell are you going to do with that? She's a nurse. I come from a long line of nurses, You should go to nursing school, you can always get a job, yeah. And I really think that AFS could do a really slick promo piece that profiles the work that folklore graduates are doing in health, education. We have people placed all over the place. Education, arts administration, archival management, tourism, historic preservation, film and radio production, international policy work, development, business consultation. I think of Mal O'Connor and his business, community activism, museum curatorship, and working in state and national park systems. We're placed all over the place. There's lots that we can do with a degree in folklore, but nobody knows it. And if we had a slick promotional piece, I think it could be used to get students interested in, well, gee, if I got a degree in folklore, I could actually work in the national park system maybe, or I could do this, or I could do that. But also could perhaps be used in the academy for deans and whatever to say, well, gosh, never thought of this, but there are many arenas where we have had great success. You know, people are at the top of their game. And why we don't tout that is beyond me. But I don't think it would take a lot of money, and I think that you could profile maybe 20 people who are making a big impact in the world.
A possible venue for showing what Peggy's describing is I think most campuses have major preview days where the students parade through, or their parents, whatever, to figure out what kinds of majors. So being able to show that at campus preview days would be good. I had a thought about Elliott's point about the existence of the endowment at AFS and our willingness to contribute to this. One of the little things that's problematic for administrators to talk about is the fact that when a faculty member dies, there's very often a groundswell of emotion from former students and present colleagues around developing a scholarship or some kind of fund that's named after that individual. And you know, we've all seen this. Most universities have lots of underfunded funds that way. There's this immediate swell of, oh, this person changed the lives of so many students, you know. Of course we'll get a couple of $100,000, and actually you don't. And when you don't, little piddly sums of money are really problematic for the university. It's hard to distribute, there's no return, it's just, it's difficult. It may be that some of us who think we might die someday could consider AFS as the recipient of whatever largesse our former students or colleagues might have, rather than our home institution. The amounts, and Tim can jump in here if I'm wrong, but what might be a significant sum of money that we could really do something with would be the kind of thing that we in the dean's office go, what the hell can we do with this piddly amount of money, given all of the, because there's all kinds of rules about what you can't use a scholarship money for, you know, in this kind of way, and endowment. There are all kinds of restrictions against what we could do. But we might make the AFS endowment something that the mortals among us would consider, letting it be known that that's where we would want the largesse of our friends to go to.
I just want to say one thing in reaction to what's come up. One of the problems that Folklore does not have is getting students. The students are there at the undergraduate levels for the courses, and we can't accommodate the graduate students that are applying now. That's our big problem, our immediate problem. At Indiana, you'll get about, what, 75 applications a year, and how many will you take?
10 to 15 on the folklore side.
So
I was talking about diversity.
Yeah.
You know, a
and,
diverse population.
Yeah.
You got to show them that they can make a living.
I can say something, speaking to Peggy's point. I totally agree with, it's a good idea, the shiny, you know, the more, you know, polished presentation. But on the AFS website right now,
Yes.
there is a wonderful section that I know because a kid called me and said, what can I do if I get into green social? And I Googled it, and I got this great section of the AFS website that says you can do this, you can do that, and I'm not sure everybody knows about it, but I think that you guys, if you don't, you should all be sending your undergraduates there when they ask you, because it's a great resource, and maybe that could be the seed of what you're talking about.
And you should put that link, on, if you have a web page on your own, at your own institution, link it to that site. We have ours linked to that site, so people know if they want, what do folklorists do, what kind of jobs do they get? I send them there. And you can put it on your syllabus. Absolutely.
I'm Jill Rudy, and I'm from Brigham Young University. And I also wanted to mention what national organizations can contribute to university programs. I think recently what gave us significant profile in the university was when we sponsored an archives conference, and Peggy was involved, coming from the American Folklife Center. And that was huge. And their connection with the Library of Congress is actually what was very beneficial to us, because Bert Wilson had donated his archives to the library, and so we were already housed there. But then when they found Folklore had this connection with the Library of Congress, then they've been able to make more partnerships. And so that in terms of the university level, has been very, very helpful. Because Bert had partnered with the library, we also had the money to have the conference. And then we could go to the other partners and say, we've got this much from the library, can I have this much from the College of Humanities? But there also is kind of a drawback in this. I'm going to go to the IRB issue that Peggy mentioned. I'm on the university review board for human subjects research, and I'm very important because they need a non-scientist. And so, they want me there every meeting, and I'm there to say, that's not lay terms. I don't know what you're talking about. And we had wondered what to do with our archives. And when I think it was the Oral History Association came out saying, we don't really count because we don't do generalizable research, we used that as an in, and we actually no longer have our folklore students have any sort of connection with the IRB. And so that was good news. They still do a release form for the archives itself, so they can use it. But as an academic, I did not like admitting that, wait, what I do is not really research. That was an odd thing to admit. And so, although having those connections impressed the university at large, my colleagues in my department, speaking of close neighbors, they're not impressed with that. They tend to think folklore is rather soft and descriptive, not analytic, which is something we could trace back through our history. And so, I'm going to go back and I'm going to tell them, we are intellectually engaged. There's someone there calling for us to talk about the inner other of modernity. That's what will resonate with some of my colleagues who are very involved in issues of modernity and Enlightenment studies. So we need to cover all our bases. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Thank all of you. I think the IRB issue is such a big issue and is becoming such a great problem, and I've recommended for a while now that this really has to be obviously there are tactics everyone can engage in at their local level, but I think we've got a problem here that is the biggest threat to free speech that we have yet seen in the United States, quite frankly. That your ability to talk to people and write about what you've talked about is subject to prior review. It's a very strange situation, which strangely academics have embraced.
But we should never have embraced it, and we did embrace it at a meeting.
We should never have embraced it. Nobody should embrace it.
We said we would ask for expedited review, and I remember when that happened. Well, it's a whole ball of wax, but
even expedited review does not solve the problem. This has to occur at some level beyond even the society, but the society, I think, can contribute to it and begin to contact other organizations and perhaps legal entities, because eventually it would seem to me a court case has to result from the ability of a local review board to determine both the quality of, the weather of, and the disposition of that scholar in the university on the basis of something they want to talk and write about. Anyway, we can't go there today, but it is a crucial issue. I thought it was getting a little better. But a couple of people have come up to me today, Peggy, one of them, saying it's getting much, much, much worse.
It's different at different universities.
Yes, because IRBs are local. They're local groups. So we've got a major kind of problem which impact us differentially. But I think it's something that the AFS also has to take up and figure a strategy to address this at a very high level, not simply responding at local levels.
Elliott, we should mention, though, the wonderful statement that is on our website, which I really appreciate that the AFS board has done.
There is a statement on the IAF,
right on top of that.
but that's, again, if you really think about it, it's still something a local person can use to argue with their board, but it's not a global response. It's a tactic, and hopefully helpful in some cases, but it's not going to solve the basic problem.
Can I just respond to what Jill said, though, about Peggy coming? I think that having people come from the Library of Congress, having people who have served at the NEA and the NEH to our institutions makes a huge difference. We tried very hard one year to get Bill Ferris to come as our graduation speaker, but he was just locked up. But we worked on it for a long time, and I know it would have made a tremendous difference. So, and I know you can't all be spread out that far because, you know, there are only a few of you, but I do think that helps tremendously.
I agree.
I agree.
Okay, well, in the name of everyone concerned, which includes the organizers of this pre-conference, the panelists, thank you for being here, thank you for listening, and thank you for contributing.